Imagine being able to design your company, a company that you came up with to be like, hey, I want to help the planet. I want to help the oceans, especially, and be able to come up and design projects that actually help the ocean. Not in your traditional ways of like saving a reef or going out and doing like marine biology and science stuff, but actually helping conservation, helping policy, and building a company that has all those people. It has scientists, it has policymakers, it has communications people. It's just a great company. Imagine building that. Imagine being able to work on projects that you want to work on, that even you come up with yourself, as well as help others with. Well, that's who we're going to be talking to today. We're going to be talking to Katrina Ryan, who is the founder and in charge of Mindfully Wired. We're going to talk about some of the projects that she's been able to do and some of the projects that she hopes to do in the future. It's going to be a great episode. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you can speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. Now, today's episode, usually on the Wednesdays, we usually talk about science communication. And I thought that that's what this episode was going to be about. I hit up Katrina Ryan on LinkedIn. We hadn't spoken in a few years, really, off and on, like through email, but not really online. Though I first connected with her, we talked about how her Mindfully Wired company was helping market a straight to consumer, a direct to consumer seafood plan from the fishermen and fishing villages in Cornwall, UK, really being able to offer a plethora of like 40 different sustainably fished species to the UK people in and around the area of Cornwall so that they can have fish during the pandemic, because imports weren't coming in properly because of the whole pandemic and the shutdown and everything like that. So she was able to help keep a lot of those businesses open just through Mindfully Wired with her colleagues. And now she's built up her company to almost 20 people. That's amazing to be able to say, hey, in a few years, we're going to start to work on these different projects. We're going to assemble the team, not just of marketing people and communications people. We're going to put some policymakers with this. We're going to put some lawyers. We're going to put some scientists. We're going to put all these different people in, and we're going to be able to have this company that can offer a plethora of different services. And I think that's amazing. And I want to have Katrina on to talk about some of her projects, which she did. And some of the projects she's actually, you know, with the help of her colleagues, been able to design herself and have them funded. And I think that's something that's really admirable about the companies that are coming out now, is really a for-profit being able to design something that is insanely wonderful. And so that's what we're going to talk to Katrina about today on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Here's the interview, and we'll talk to you after. Hey, Katrina, welcome back to the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. Are you ready to talk about all things marine science communications?
Hi, Andrew. It's lovely to see you again. I've missed our chat. Yeah, of course I'm ready. I'm always ready.
Absolutely. It's been a long time since we've actually chatted. We've communicated over email and over LinkedIn a number of times, but I'm really happy you were able to come on the podcast again today. This is a bit of a catch-up call for both of us, as you know, we love chatting with each other and catching up on what type of work we've been up to and things like that. But today I want to share that with the audience and just be like, look, your company has grown in number of people, the number of diversity of projects. You know, we first interviewed you when it was during the pandemic, and you were talking about helping, you know, fishing communities in Cornwall, you know, basically save their businesses in a way with your communication strategies. And I feel like that's just grown from there into all different sorts. And going on your website now, you know, you see you have linguists, you have policy people, you have communicators, and it's just great to kind of just get to know how you build a company like this, you know, how you build a firm like this to serve the marine conservation and science community. I think it's something that is unique, and I wanted to share that with people to show that, you know, you don't always have to go the quote unquote traditional way with joining one organization. You can create your own and develop it from there. So I'm looking forward to that. But before we get into all of that, Katrina, why don't you just remind the audience of who you are and what you do?
Yeah, happy to. Although I'm never great at doing this in a super pithy way, despite my job. So my name's Katrina Ryan. I am the founder director of a company called Mindfully Wired. We're a specialist communications consultancy working in the kind of ocean, marine protection, marine biodiversity and fisheries space. I guess we'll delve into a little bit more about what that means, but really we work with such a broad church of stakeholders. Could be fishing industry, seafood sector, governments, research, NGOs, retail, the whole mix, and we work all over the world as well.
Yeah, it's quite interesting to see how diverse you've gotten. I think when we first met and discussed on the podcast, a lot of it was essentially seafood, right? I think was that the first sort of iteration, I guess, or first types of clients that you had, but you've grown quite a bit since then. You've grown in the number of people as well. Can you kind of just take us through a little bit of that growth through the pandemic? Not a lot of people had their companies grow in people, especially during the pandemic. Can you just kind of talk a little bit about sort of how things have changed since the last time we've talked? I know we probably don't have the amount of time that it takes to go over how all those changes happened and things, but if you could briefly do that, that'd be great.
Yeah, of course. And the first thing I'll say is, we've always worked with the seafood sector and fishing communities. But the mission at the heart of Mindfully Wired has always been about, a better future for people and the ocean. So it's about, I really believe that we can't just have conservation conversations in isolation. You've got to work with the people that live on the coast and that make a living on the sea. You've got to include industry in conversations around conservation. And that is the slightly complex space that we've always tried to hold for the projects that we work on. It's not flying a flag in one direction or another. So as you said, we first came across each other during the pandemic when Mindfully Wired pivoted quite abruptly to kind of targeting all of our efforts on supporting coastal communities here in the UK during the pandemic. Obviously, as with elsewhere, their markets were closing off. Fishermen weren't able to sell their catch into restaurants. And as I'm sure you're aware, the lifeblood of coastal communities is often their fishing industry. And coastal communities are 75% more likely to be deprived than inland communities. So it's essential to maintain those kind of jobs and employment. And people need food. So we kind of overnight became fish merchants working with some of our clients in the southwest and redirecting healthy, sustainably caught seafood to people's houses contact-free. And that was wild for us. That was really odd, really exciting, really energizing, completely restructuring the business, working with new partners. But behind all of that, there was still important advocacy and communications work to be done. The bigger seafood and fisheries and marine conservation organizations still needed to advance their agendas during the pandemic. But because they were larger and often government-funded bodies, they were more likely to have to furlough big chunks of their staff. So Mindfully Wired, as a nimble consultancy at the time of about 6 staff, we decided we would kind of try and outpace the economic shock of the pandemic and be there to service those projects as a more nimble bolt-on. Right. It was a time for a lot of growth in the company because there was a lot of important work to be done, and I think we closed out the pandemic with about 20 staff. And our projects during that time was everything from supporting governments in facilitating international meetings with their peers on important marine science issues, through to furthering the work we did in coastal communities on marketing locally caught and sustainable fish, helping universities with communications training for their science graduates, developing new coastal connectivity initiatives and new geographies, just a bit of everything. It was really exciting, but it was almost a time of such rapid growth that you couldn't keep track of it. You just had to keep going, 7 days a week.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. I mean, that's a lot of work to be able to, if you're starting off with 6 people and then pivoting so many times, you pivot for the seafood industry, helping them basically redefine the industry there. That's essentially what you did there. Not only redefining the industry, but also reintroducing the people of the UK to their own species. Because a lot of the times, I've covered stories on this where most of the fish that they have is imported. And then now here you have this fishery in Cornwall being like, look, we have about, I think it was like 40 different species of fish that could be fished, and you're offering it to the people of the UK. And so they kind of got to rediscover, which could happen not just in the UK, it could happen in Canada, it can happen in the US. We just tend to, eat the popular types of fish, that we know and we're comfortable with. But there's so many different fish species that could be sustainably fished and offered to us. We just don't know because it's different and it's change and things like that. Well, the pandemic was all about change. You offered that in a communication style, and the people of Cornwall and the fishing community offered that in product, and it worked out really well. So love to hear that kind of stuff. But then to be able to offer the services that you do to a number of different organizations, in and around the UK or internationally, that's a lot of work to be able to do that. Did you have the network at the time to introduce Mindfully Wired to these organizations? And can you just maybe mention a couple of the ones that you did work with right off the bat, like during that time? Did we get cut?
I'm sorry, I lost the last part of that question. Do you
Yeah, sorry. No, I'll repeat it. No, that's my. It happens every once in a while. It gets cut, so I apologize for that. Essentially, what I asked is did you have the network of people where you could introduce Mindfully Wired to, or did you have to sort of go out and find, develop your own network during that time online, of course, because you couldn't do it in person as much because of the pandemic, and then was that a difficult thing to keep up with, all that work to keep up with and be able to do the work for those organizations? Yeah,
there's so much to respond to that. I think one thing I'll say is that it's always difficult to keep up with all the work that we're doing. There's so much to do. It's all really exciting, as I've kind of already alluded to. It's often quite complex, the work that we're undertaking. And that's partly about the DNA of who we are as a business. And I can come back to that because we're by no means the traditional comms consultancy.
Right.
But in terms of that work coming to us during the pandemic, I think Mindfully Wired already had one really important key USP, which is that we've been specialist in our area from day one. We're 10 years old now, and we've always known fisheries inside out and the marine world inside out. We can engage with science. So there's very few bolt-on agencies that can also bring creative thinking that can engage at that level with the complexity of marine management and fisheries management. So we had a good network in the sense that people knew kind of who we were. Mm-hmm. And I think what the pandemic was a time for us showing the breadth of what we mean when we say communication. So I don't mean an off-the-shelf PR package. I mean, we can build you a website, we can make you an incredibly moving film that we'll also script and package and distribute. But we will also, develop your long-term strategic vision for your organization and write a comms and governance strategy that sits alongside that. We'll help interpret your science and communicate that better. We will hold events for you, whether that's online or in person. It's kind of anything that helps bridge gaps between groups and that helps people communicate more effectively is what I include under my umbrella definition of communication. So it's kind of much broader. And in that sense, we're almost like a blend of an NGO and a traditional comms agency. We've come to think of it as a cause and effect agency. So we try and create change with the way in which we communicate about these things. And that was, the pandemic was a real time for testing and proving that. Another thing that we had to do as we grew during that time was become bolder in the work that we went for. And that was a huge thing for us as well, kind of living our values through some larger projects. Like during that time, we were invited to pitch for a project on promoting safety in fishing communities amongst fishermen. It's the most deadly profession in the UK, and globally it's an enormously deadly profession. So anything to improve safety at sea is vital. And I remember getting the tender on my desk in the middle of the pandemic and being so intimidated by this big piece of national work, and could we actually bid for it? Could we win it? And talking to my kind of second in command at the time, Harriet, and saying, oh, do we have the guts to go for this? And thinking, we're going to do it. We're going to flip the safety narrative on its head, because all people do at this point in time in terms of safety comms to fishing communities is tell fishermen they're going to die and that they should wear a life jacket so that their body is brought home for their wife. And we wanted to talk to them about reasons they had to live. So we went out and spoke to fishing communities about what they care about, what did they come home for, and developed this campaign called Home and Dry. And that was a real mission that energized us during the pandemic. And that campaign went on to create an enormous amount of impact in fishing communities. It was seen by 77% of the fleet. Around 70% of people took action as a result of it. We've won awards. We had an award-winning artist, Johnny Flynn, write a song especially for us to be the track behind the video. And, it's been one of those campaigns we can feel really proud of, because at a time when fishermen were perhaps more desperate to get out to sea to catch when they could during the pandemic, we wanted them to be safety minded as well. So when I think back on that time of crazy growth and the pandemic, it's also a time when we were perhaps more or most fully expressing our values in the type of work we were acting on. Well,
and this is what it really comes down to, I feel, and this is a lot of other companies that I've noticed. You know, I want to reiterate this point that I've been putting together for a number of episodes. Is it comes down to the business's values, right? I've talked to a lot of businesses around here. I've looked for a lot of businesses. I've always looked for eco-friendly, sustainable businesses, and not a lot of businesses will necessarily sell for environmental, reasons. They're like, oh, well, buy us because we're sustainable clothing, or we're this, we're good for the environment. It's buy us because our product's the best. Like, that's why. Here's the coolness factor. If it's a company that sells clothes or things like that. But it really comes down to their base values. When you go to the about page on their company, I've never gone to more about pages on companies now where it's like, what's their intrinsic value of starting this company? Was it to make the world a better place and offer their values in that product? And I find the product becomes better that way. It's more eco-friendly. It's more sustainable in that way. I feel the same way just talking to you, Katrina, about your company. It's, look, we talk down a lot to the fishing community. You can't do this. You can't do this. You can't fish here. You can't fish. That's what a lot of times when I speak to fishermen, that's what they hear. But they love the environment. They love fishing. It's a cultural thing for many of them that I've spoken to. It's something that they love. They take pride in. And when somebody says you can't, it's almost like, hey, you can't go out there without being safe. Like, you need to be safe. You need this. It's no. Why? Like, what are your values? What are the fishermen's values? Like, you want to come home and you want to be with your family. Fishing is life, but it's also your family's life too. And sometimes we all need to be reminded of that with work and things like that. You and I need to be reminded of that. Like, we have a life outside of work and we want you to enjoy that life. So how about you come home safe? Like, let's like flip the switch and put it into a positive manner and sort of tap into their values of family. You want to be able to explain to your next generation of how to be able to fish. Well, you can't do that if you're not around. You can only do that if you're around. And I think by putting that message together, it flips everything.
Yeah.
If you think about that.
One thing we'll never do is negative campaigning. I think we are always trying to tell a positive story, because I think that's where you create change. We're trying to shine a light on things that are positive so that people want to travel in that direction, So yeah, that was a real lesson for me as well, in just how much people can exclude groups from conversations that are about those groups. So no one had thought previously in developing these safety campaigns for the fishing community to go and talk to the fishing community in depth about what might motivate them.
Yeah.
And I'm not one for people being excluded from conversations. I think that's very much where Mindfully Wide has grown up from, is that idea that we all work better if we're collaborating and if things are inclusive and positive. So that's just one example of how that carries through in our work, but it's certainly one that we're really proud of.
So for the work that you've been able to do, you mentioned the work with the fishermen, that was a bid, like you had a tender and you bid on it against other companies who wanted the same type of job. Are most of your jobs, from grant writing or from bidding on specific things, or some of them just from relationships that you've built with some of the companies or organizations over the years? Because, I mean, if you think about a lot of nonprofit organizations where most of the work you would think would come from marine conservation, they don't necessarily have a lot of money to be able to pay an organization where it's profitable for, your company to do that. I might be way off base here, but I was just wondering, like, how do you land a lot? And don't take any secrets, so don't tell any secrets here, but how does a company like yours land a lot of the jobs? Is it through tender? Is it through just sort of relationships? It's a little bit of both. How does that work?
So there's three pillars to this, and no secrets at all here. Just the first one is word of mouth. We've always benefited enormously from that. We get a lot of organic outreach from potential clients. We get a lot of repeat business. That's our stickiness factor. Lots of our clients stick with us for years on end, which we're very grateful for, and we love building those long-term relationships.
Of course.
Then we have the tenders where we'll see something and we think, God, that just feels so mindfully wired. We're definitely gonna go for that one. And I think it's not just me on the team. Lots of us love a pitching moment. So those can be lovely, creative times in the team when we're coming up with a vision for a project. And then the third one is the one that maybe excites me the most and is, again, perhaps an area where we're slightly odd or rare as a business, is that we'll identify an issue that exists, something that we think needs addressing and resolving or isn't getting enough attention. And we will develop a project that we think can plug that gap. We'll see who we think we want to work with on that, and we'll go out and find the funds and then create that project ourselves. We'll introduce that into the ecosystem, the landscape that we're working in. And so those are some of my favorite initiatives. So
yeah, I get butterflies just thinking about it.
Do I have time to give you just 3 quick examples?
Absolutely. Yes, you do.
So the first one, our oldest one, is kind of a concept we developed and then went out, got funded, and is still running to this day, which is 6 years later, is we run something called the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Fisheries in Westminster. So that is a fully cross-party platform within the system of Parliament that holds events and conducts research to basically increase the knowledge base on fisheries and marine issues within Parliament so that the legislature can make more informed decisions around policy and law. That was something that I had in my mind, well before Mindfully Wired, that I wanted to do. And then when the Brexit vote came around and fisheries was such a totemic issue in the UK, but it's so complex and it's so different depending on where you are, it felt like a real moment for parliamentarians to need to have access to some free, broad, sector-wide source of information brought to them so that they could comment in an informed way on these important issues that are at the heart of Brexit. So we secured some funding to run that within Parliament, and we do run that. I should say at the moment we technically don't exist because we've just had a general election over here, but we are out recruiting new MPs to come on board with our all-party parliamentary group, and we have an enormously ambitious programme of research and events moving forwards. And that is about open access to democracy, it's about open access to power for the sector, it's about our decision makers being really, really well informed, and it's about there being a space for everyone at the heart of Parliament. So I love that, and we've been very lucky to secure continued funding to keep that going. So that's one of our own.
Even just to have that level of federal government, not influence, but you're putting that together at the federal level. That's going to change things. That as a company, so. It's that's going to change things. Yeah.
And it's, for us, the importance is that our role is neutral. This isn't lobbying. And again, that speaks to a personal passion of mine, which is that lobbyists are expensive. You're talking a minimum 25,000 a month plus. I used to work in Westminster, so I know lobbying. I just choose not to use that because it's an exclusive form of access, and I think people should be able to approach their decision makers on an equal footing. So by creating this all-party parliamentary group, we can have fishermen from Scotland, Cornwall, Wales, the East Coast there with academics, NGO, people who would never have a lobbyist can be there having the conversations they need to have. So then a really exciting project, I feel like you'll like this one, is a piece of tech development that we formed a consortium around a few years ago with a government science body called CFAS, the Zoological Society of London, and an engineering firm called Arabada, who are amazing, to think about how to improve at-sea monitoring systems for fishermen so that they're less burdensome for scientists to interpret the data from. At the moment, you just get 24 hours of video footage. They're expensive, big chunky pieces of kit, 15 grand a system, that kind of thing. And specifically, we wanted to work on one that might work to capture better data about interactions with endangered species like dolphins, porpoises.
Right.
And so that project, again, is ongoing, but we're also now kind of really testing out in the field a product that we call Insight 360, which is a small kind of plug-and-play machine learning device that has a voice-activated node, an underwater acoustic recorder, and continuous video monitoring. As I say, it's continuous learning, it's AI, so it's better with time, and fishermen can speak directly to it and effectively, therefore, annotate the video footage that is bounced back to scientists via satellite, so it's much more efficient. But at the end of that project, all the designs, all the specs will be made totally open access for other people to build the same thing. The point of the kit is it should cost just 100 quid or so, really, really affordable. And we want it to go global because it can help fishermen, it can help the marine environment. Yeah. And it shouldn't cost so much money to monitor effectively at sea. So that's another one. That's been incredible to work on because I'm no engineer, but I could, we each tripped in our little bit of expertise.
Yeah.
And then the third one I wanted to mention just quickly, because it built on that coastal communities and spreading knowledge around seafood, kind of improving a seafood palette from a breadth perspective, tasting local. We also secured some funding to do a brief pilot study in Cornwall after the pandemic, working with a processing company, a local fleet, environmental consultants, and a chef to identify 2 top species where, if we ate more of these, they're totally sustainable, it would take pressure off other slightly less sustainable stocks, and the consumer doesn't know anything about them. How do we introduce them? What are the constraints from a processing perspective? How much does the fleet need to make per kilo for these to be viable target fish? What can our chef do to introduce these to a broader audience? And we did a 3-month feasibility study on these 2 fish, Megrim sole and spider crab. We rebranded them as Cornish sole and Cornish king crab.
Okay.
And by the end of our 3-month,
like
love that. By the end of our 3-month blitz of research, menu testing, consumer tasting, processing, engagement with retailers, they were, I think Megrim sole or Cornish sole was maybe the 2nd most sold fish in Cornwall, and there was a contract for Cornish king crab to be sold into one of our major retailers here in the UK. So that's had real longevity. That was only a 3-month project, but it's kind of rolling, and we hope that the Cornish Fish Producers Organisation down there is doing more on that front. So so just 3 examples there of things where we were like, there's a need here, we think we can do something to plug that gap, and we'll go get some money and a team to do that.
Can I just say something? First of all, unreal.
Oh,
like all 3 of those projects are projects, as I was thinking, I've had conversations with people, not obviously about those specific projects, but conversations with people, like ideas, like, when you're at conferences and you're with other people that are in the same business, you throw around ideas and you're like, oh, that would be really cool if we're able to do this, or that would be really cool if we're able to do this, but here are the challenges and here's the thing. And it's like the ideas that you mentioned feel very similar, obviously not the same, but very similar to be like, yeah, there are a lot of challenges in this way, but if we partner with the right people, we collaborate with the right people, or we speak to the right people, we can really get this going. And if you have that network, or you have that ability to be like, this is a great idea, let's find the funds to get it, let's do, let's put all this together, let's put the collaboration, let's put everybody in the same room or on the same computer in the same Zoom call or whatever that might be, and let's have this talk, and maybe we can get this going. And then 3 projects right there that you're able to get that going. This sounds more like NGO type work, where it's like you have your own projects, you're just able to do it because it comes from your ideas. All of them have, or it will continue to create change, in whatever they are. Like you're marketing new, or not new, local types of food. How do we get this local type of food into a market? How do we get access to data and equipment that's affordable? How do we get to do that? Boom, we've done it. Like that, just those 2 alone, is just like, it's unreal to just think from idea to actual put into place. And it seems like Mindfully Wired is just, that's what you guys do. It's like you take the ideas and you're like, okay, let's talk about these ideas. Let's formulate, a plan. Let's put it together. Let's put it in place. 3-month project, and now all of a sudden you get like a contract to put it into one of the major retailers. Come on now. This is unreal. Like, that's awesome, Katrina. That's fantastic. I mean, and obviously, like, you have the people to do that, right? And that helps, right? You invest in your people. So you mentioned at the beginning, it's a very unique company because you don't just have comms people. You have all different types of people. Can you just talk about how that came to be, where you have so many people from different sort of professional backgrounds coming together to work on these and solve these problems, essentially, is what you do. You guys are problem solvers in the marine conservation world. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
Of course. Well, and I think there's something to be said there, just a broader point about the fact that it's one of the luxuries of being a small business versus, a big NGO or a government department. Perhaps there's never been any constraints in my mind about how nimble we can be on acting on something. There's no bureaucracy, because we've been tiny, and we're less tiny now, but there's there's no need to have meetings for meeting's sakes and put things through a system. We can kind of just see something and jump in there and get going, and we have the confidence to do that, I think, partly because of the structure. But yeah, in terms of the team, it's a great question, and it's actually something I've only reasonably recently realized is quite strange, right? Is that we're a comms consultancy, but the vast majority of our staff are not people from a comms or PR background.
Right.
To me, it just made perfect sense because we're talking about technical environmental issues, you know, whether it's offshore wind or seafood supply, or even, you know, we do some things on forestry. It's good to have that science base in the team. It's a real luxury, but we look for those scientists that also have a way with words, have a way with art, have a kind of desire to make their work more accessible, because it's something that I believe is so important more broadly, right? When the biggest issues of our time are environmental, we have to be able to communicate them. Then, you know, drawing in linguists and people with policy experience, it's the same thing. I feel like we've been able to incubate comm skills because that's about connecting to people. It's about using words and art and design and digital in a specific way, but having that knowledge base behind it has been incredible. More recently, in our kind of more recent expansion, we now also have the luxury of some seriously impressive and experienced agency communications experts in Mindfully Wide as well, lending that kind of senior dimension from across the more traditional communication space. And so now I feel like Mindfully Wide is in its best iteration yet, because we have that almost like a hub of scientific and policy knowledge delivering on complex and technical projects. And then we have this wraparound of creative vision and traditional communication skills. And we're able to bolt the two together and work on projects in a way that means, you know, as I've said, we're starting to see ourselves as a cause and effect agency, because we can develop the projects and work on the science, then we can also communicate them. We can have those big mass market skills and expertise that you get in larger agencies, but we have them in our small, nimble, environmentally focused agency. So, but yeah, the breadth and diversity of the team's expertise is one of my favorite things about working at Mindfully Wired. It's never a dull day, and there's always someone that is a subject expert on whatever it is you need to talk about. So that's great.
Well, and what I love too, it's like, as you mentioned before, it is, you are putting together positive, optimistic projects that may not necessarily, I mean, mind you, you know, you've put together something that has potentially a federal impact, you know, on fisheries. So that's pretty big from a national perspective. But, you know, we look at the problems that we face with our oceans, climate change. You look at overfishing. You look at plastic pollution. All these major things that can really give people anxiety. You know, we call it climate anxiety or ocean anxiety, and it's very difficult. But you are focusing on these projects that provide, you know, results and positive results in the way, like even in their potential from a futuristic point of view, but also from sort of the impact level. And you're kind of like, you know, cutting away at some of this anxiety, like taking it away and kind of giving people sort of this positive outlook. Like that's how I see it, you know, from my perspective anyway, in terms of the work that you're doing. I know a lot of the work is focused around, you know, helping these organizations and helping, you know, sort of like a fishing community, you know, to get more access and things like that. Do you talk to the public, or do you have mechanisms to talk to the public to provide some of the like information on some of these projects that you're doing, to show some people, like in the UK, like I know the UK, you've gone through a lot of changes over the last couple of weeks, and people are asking for change. You know, Just Stop Oil, one of the organizations that making headlines around the world with their protests and people wanting change. In Europe, you know, you have the Greta Thunbergs of the world who are trying to make change, but oftentimes it gets aggressive feedback, let's just say, you know, from sort of deniers and naysayers. The work that you're doing, do you have those mechanisms to the public to just kind of say, hey, check out what we're doing here? It's pretty cool that we're doing this, and because it's such a positive thing.
So that's a really interesting question. We don't go out and do a lot of proactive storytelling about our work, because, you know, what we do is, for the vast majority, it is the work of our incredible clients. So we are lucky to be bolt-ons to their teams, and so we want their projects to become visible, and for some of those that is a general public audience, that's a consumer audience. For some of our projects, it's governments. For some of them, it's science. So I guess we always try and stay slightly out of the limelight in that way. It's actually unusual for me to talk about Mindfully Wide, and it's a treat. It's really nice to talk to you about it, but it's not my normal kind of speed. I'm more used to talking about a client's mission than my own, or our own, because it certainly is collective within the team. But we also try and engage the public in ways that help them craft and deliver their own mission. So a really brilliant piece of work we did a couple of years ago was with Surfers Against Sewage to facilitate and bring together, I think it was 200 youth activists for climate, and co-author the first youth ocean and climate manifesto to deliver to 10 Downing Street. And so that was a lovely way of kind of directly engaging with a new constituency of the public. And oh my goodness, these youth activists knocked my socks off. They were like 7 up. They were so well informed, so charismatic, so clear on what they wanted in their manifesto and how they wanted to be expressed. So that was an incredible piece of work, reaching a kind of new sector of the public. And I'd say another thing we do in terms of kind of public, perhaps more public outreach, is we go into universities and run training courses in normally for kind of master's or PhD level scientists in the environmental space, and helping them think about what their work is, the impact it could have, and how they might want to communicate that impactfully as they develop their own careers. So I like to kind of spread this gospel of, you know, don't work hidden away, don't work in a silo, reach out, connect, collaborate, communicate. If you don't know how, find someone who does, work with them. You can make amazing change if you can develop partnerships, and that's you know, good communication skills are part of developing effective partnerships.
I completely agree. I do think you should talk about Mindfully Wired more often, just as from a personal standpoint. I would love to see the behind the scenes of a lot of the things. And but I think you're right. You know, your work speaks for yourself, and your work speaks for your clients. And you know, when you talk about, you know, 200 youths coming out and saying, you know, we want to make sure that we have clean water and clean access to water, especially for surfing. That's a huge, that you have a huge impact on not only the people, but to say, hey, not only are we activists and putting this protest together, but we're putting a manifesto so we're heard, and it's going to the right people, and you have the way to get to the right people. And I think that is, you know, that's the communication that I think really matters in this point of view. But because you speak for your clients, I think that's the beauty of this whole thing. I know we're coming short on time, but just a last question. Do you have a project or a couple projects that are sort of developing that you're excited that you're able to talk about, just to kind of give us a little sneak peek? Because obviously I'd love to have you come back, or some of your staff come back to be able to talk about this, or partners and collaborators. But do you have anything that you're excited about? I'm sure you're excited about all of them, but do you have anything that's in the development?
Yeah, I should say at the outset, I of course have no favorites. All of my clients are my favorite clients, and I will certainly run over time in order to talk about my clients. There's kind of like a stable of clients I want to talk about briefly, which is about the market acting in a really interesting way to push for better conservation and environmental outcomes. And then there's one project that's making some exciting announcements in the near future that I can give you a little sneak preview on, but I hope might also speak to you about their work in lots of detail, because it's fascinating. So in the first instance, just to talk about, again, talk about the kind of complex space we occupy that isn't always about working with an NGO on a pure conservation issue, but looking to how other people can act in a way that benefits people on the planet. We've got a kind of 3-client stable at the moment at Mindfully Wired of big, like pre-competitive collaborations between huge companies in the supply chain, retailers, buyers, processors, literally billions of pounds of global purchasing power. And it's fascinating to see this movement now, these coalitions forming around specific environmental and social issues where they want to drive positive change, and they're saying government isn't moving fast enough. We, the supply chain, are going to try and use some of our heft, our perspective, our point of view on this to help push change in a positive direction. And that's been a new form of project for Mindfully Wired in the last 2 to 3 years. They're very advocacy focused, but you know, we've got 3 clients we're working with at the moment. One, the North Atlantic Pelagic Advocacy Group is pushing hard for Europe and Iceland, Greenland, the UK, Norway, Russia, all vested coastal states to come together and act responsibly, follow the science, and fish 3 pelagic stocks in line with sustainable science-based management in the Northeast Atlantic. That's a big mouthful, but we're talking about Atlanto-Scandian herring, mackerel, and blue whiting, iconic stocks in the most data-rich fisheries on the planet that are currently being fished beyond scientific advice due to a lack of political agreement. And that client is a bunch of businesses putting their competition to one side to come together and think about new ways to campaign and drive change for those fisheries, so that we hope as soon as possible, the coastal states negotiators come together and come to a science-based sharing agreement. It's change on an ecosystem scale. You know, if it goes wrong or right, it is generationally impactful.
Yeah.
So there's no option for it to go wrong. But it's tricky because it is the most intense and entrenched politics you could work with. So that is a really fascinating project. And we have other clients using a similar model to advocate for better human rights protections and avoiding social labour abuses during seafood, as part of the seafood supply chain, and advocating for better tuna management. So again, huge issues, but you know, over the horizon, offshore, out of sight, easy for people to ignore, and therefore all the more important to communicate about and advocate for. And then the one I'll give you a little sneak peek on is a client, the Blue Carbon Action Partnership, which is really, you know, we love action at Mindfully Wide, and this is a really action-focused, collaborative initiative hosted by the World Economic Forum, but to drive high-quality blue carbon projects around the world. So blue carbon is amazing environments like salt marshes and mangroves where they suck in and store carbon. They're beautiful, they're precious, they're often very fragile, have enormous importance to local communities. And it's a very complex project. Again, it's about creating pipelines for investment and protection. It's working with NGOs, and at the heart of it is the importance of local communities. And that project's got lots of exciting stuff around the corner, some announcements to be made. So I'm hoping that you would have a chat with some of the scientists and the people involved in that, because that really is another project that is on a global scale trying to make exactly the right kind of change and bring to life these blue carbon environments that are just so precious. So yeah, you can hear from how I talk about them. It's all too exciting. There's not enough hours in the day, but thank you for asking.
I love that. I'm excited. Maybe we can have some of your partners on to talk more about those projects on in the future. And of course, Katrina, we'd love to have you back on to get updates and talk more about science communication. And I think it's bringing, you know, I think what you've built and what you continue to build with the people that you have in the company is not just communications, it's change. And I think that's really, really huge. And it gives me a lot of hope in this industry of communications and conservation and inclusivity and diversity. I just think it's really great. I really love what you continue to build here, and I'd love to have you on and talk more shop and so forth on the podcast, and maybe off the podcast, but definitely on the podcast, so the audience could get to hear about all the wonderful projects that you're working on and that your company's working on. So thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Anytime. It's been a pleasure.
All right. Thank you, Katrina, for joining us on this episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I just love the fact that I got to hang out with Katrina. There's so many more things that I wanted to ask her, and I'm hoping that she'll be able to come back on soon to be able to talk about more of the projects that she's working on through Mindfully Wired, and why. You know, I think when you start to look at the way people are building out their projects, people are building out their firms and their companies and what they want to do around oceans. I've met a lot of people in different avenues, from storytellers to marketers to business people to startups to scientists, and they're all doing different things, but with the goal of protecting the ocean. And over the next number of months, I'm going to be trying to interview people who are working with companies, or building their own company to provide options, alternative options to what we think are wasteful options. In fact, on Friday's next episode, I'm going to be talking to Regan Kelly, who is one of the founders and people like of her family that work on Better for All, which sell compostable cups, commercially compostable cups. This is something that is absolutely amazing. She's working on this. They just did a job where they supplied all the cups for the Tortuga Festival in Florida, and it's great to see companies and organizations working towards this common goal of just being sustainable and putting it out there, not expecting, handouts from the government, not just saying, hey, you know what, here's a problem that we see. We're trying to solve it because that's what business people do. And we're trying to solve it in the right way that they can feel good and follow their family values. And I think that's really important. So we're being able to do that. We're able to do that with Katrina Ryan. And next episode, we're going to be able to do that with Regan Kelly. And I'm super excited to be able to present that to you. So if you don't want to miss this, the next episode, episode or episodes after that, don't forget to follow or subscribe on your favorite platform. And just to let people know, for those of you who have listened all the way through, those of you who are listening on through Spotify, you can now add comments. I think they started to add out comments. I'd love to hear your comments if you're listening through Spotify, or if you don't normally listen through Spotify, maybe you listen to it later on. And so there's options there that you can do, that you can use. So there's comments. We're going to put polls together in the future, and there's just a much more interactive way to engage with people through Spotify with your favorite podcasters like myself. Hopefully I'm your favorite. But you can check that out. And you can also see I'm actually started to put up video podcasts on Spotify because they're now allowing that. So a little different way of doing things, but it'll be a lot of fun. So I hope you enjoy that. Let me know your experience on Spotify if you normally listen to it or if you're converting over to that. Love to hear your experience with that. But it doesn't matter how you listen to the episode. I just want you to hear it and share it with your favorite people so that they can get the most out of this podcast and you can get the most out of this podcast, and we can share that message of how to protect the ocean. I want to thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.